All right, it seems like we're at time. So if everybody's ready, yeah, exactly. Thank you. If we're ready to get going, I'll give everybody one more moment to get settled, turn around. Feel free to take some notes, but at the end, there is going to be a QR code link to this entire presentation made public. So I'm going to throw like 30 different links at you. You don't need to try and write any of them down or memorize everything I'm talking about. It will all be presented at the end, so you can take it home, grab these schedules, grab some of these links, and think about it for yourself. So this presentation is Teaching Onshape in FRC Without Stressing. So let's get into it. So today's topic, going to be setting the scope for this presentation, talking about what are we going to be going over and what related topics are we not going to cover with this set of skills that we're going to be developing. Speaking of skills, we're going to do what are the difference between what I see as foundational skills that all students need at a base level versus what do we consider more advanced skills that students should attain to or should try to acquire but don't necessarily need. Also going to go over a lot of different curriculum and lessons that you can use. Again, going to walk through a lot of these, highlight them, give quick reasons, and then we're going to actually get into my scheduling suggestions based on, practices that I have seen work. We'll talk about how you can schedule it, how to give students feedback. Then we're actually going to get into using your classroom. So we'll get into it, but most of you should be on the educator plan in Onshape, which does give you a classes and assignments functionality. So you can use that in conjunction with these lessons to actually provide a very structured system of I'm gonna assign work and I'm gonna see as students start it, as they progress through it, as they submit it for feedback, and as I say it is good to go or needs more work. And then also just gonna provide some further project ideas. Juju touched on some, Mike Corsetto talked about some in his talk. So I'm just going to give a couple more ideas and some links out as well to hopefully inspire you to, take this further than just modeling your robot. So who am I? So my name is Drew Bennett. I'm a Senior Education Solutions Engineer at PTC Education. That's a whole lot of words, but I work at Onshape and I focus on tech services, webinars, demos, hence why I'm here, and also a lot of technical marketing, and I manage our K-12 partnerships, which includes FIRST Robotics. Also a certified Onshape professional, so I like to think I know what I'm talking about at least a little bit. My first experience, so I started as a student in 2013 on Team 4564 up in Brewer, Maine. Really enjoyed my time there, truly fell in love with the program, and that's where I found my passion for design. So after, we had a rough district championship in 2014, which came down to a lot of robot design issues. I saw that something that my team needed to do better with was learning how to design and make, better robots that we could modify, repair metric, we could improve. So that's where my passion for CAD came from, and I've stuck with it ever since. So since 2016, I've been a CAD and manufacturing mentor, do a lot of strategy type stuff, was a drive coach for a while. Currently, I work mostly with 6329 up in Bucksport, Maine, and I also help remotely with 3467, the Wyndham Windup. So I'm going to be throwing a lot at you, so lock in. It's time to go. Let's get going. So what's the scope? So what is the goal for your CAD and design team? I summed this up in one sentence. It's 3D model a competitive FRC robot. Great. Everybody knew that though. But there's a whole lot more to this. How do we want to actually break this down? So I like to break it down as you need to design a set of mechanisms that do three things. The first is perform scoring-related tasks better than your competition. This is one of your goals. You want to make sure they are detailed, parametric in nature, so you can update and change them as the season progresses, and you want to ensure that your sub-assemblies fit early in the build season. You also want to make sure that anything you design can actually be machined, be assembled, and be maintained by your team with your tools. These are the three main paradigms I would say comes down to 3D modeling a competitive FRC robot. But the problem is, these aren't all truly CAD. So performing scoring-related tasks is more strategic design than it is CAD. We've all been there. We've all been to competitions where you see a robot that looks like it has been beautifully designed, beautifully machined, but due to some strategic design error, it's not actually able to complete game tasks at the same level as other robots. Maybe it couldn't quite reach level 4 of the reef, or it was unable to score in level 1. These types of things can be helped with CAD, but you have to learn how to do strategic design through other methods. Similar thinking, this is more related to CAD, but it is still a different skill set. Design for manufacturing, again, you can design something beautiful, but you might not be able to machine it on the router you have. You've set out your swerve drive, you've got your belly pan laid out, you pull down the DXF, and then you bring it in and you realize, your router only fits 24 wide and your belly pan is 26 inches wide, and now you're kind of stuck. So that's a type of logic that, that needs to be taught separately. Designing for manufacturing, especially for your skills, is something your team needs to address and is generally very individualized to your specific tools and what your team is good and not good at. However, designing a robot that's detailed, parametric, and is done quickly, that is just CAD. If you are better at CAD, you are better at getting through your sketches, your features, your assemblies. This is the type of thing that you can get this done sooner, which does directly lead to success. I also like to think about how we can group CAD members. I think this is helpful to understand where students are at and what they should be able to do going into the build season. So if you have somebody that's like a new member, they're new to CAD, and they don't even really understand the base level concepts, they're going to struggle with, well, what's a constraint? What do you mean coincident versus concentric? A beginner might understand those things. They've probably been in a CAD class, or maybe they did a little bit of this before. They've, been a duckling for somebody and they've seen this before. Then you get into proficient users, and this would be the goal for like most of our students to be at by the time January 10th rolls around and we're kicking the season off. We want them to have a strong CAD understanding. They're able to mostly make a mechanism on their own with some guidance, and they've got some advanced skills but still need guidance. Then there's, of course, your CAD leads who can just make a beautiful robot all on their own because, they understand basically all aspects. They've got the strategic design. They've got the design for manufacturing. They've got the ability to, delegate tasks while also working on their own tasks. So that's the ultimate goal. Not every student is going to get to that point, but there are ways to get everybody there. So the objectives for this presentation, what we're aiming to do is highlight resources that can get students from new members and beginners to being proficient users and CAD leads. So we're going to talk about establishing those foundational skills, the main things you need to succeed with CAD, and then we're going to talk about how you can build into those advanced skills. So we're going to highlight a ton of resources, show some example schedules, and discuss extra practice opportunities. What we will not do is figure out a solution that works for everybody. Some teams are probably in the midst of their training right now. Other teams won't start maybe until mid-September because they're dictated by the school year. So I'm going to try and give some examples, but you're going to have to work to fit these for your team. Also, not really get into strategic design. I think there are better presentations for that honestly do like a retrospective of FIRST history to talk about what is the best way to intake, what is the best way to launch a game object. That is a separate but related talk. Not going to get too much into design for manufacturing, and also we can't ensure you build that Einstein caliber robot next year. Would be great, but that's tough. So skills, foundational and advanced. How do I break this down? And this might be debatable, but I think there's some good logic here. So what do I define as a foundational skill? So it's the most fundamental set of skills for CAD modeling. You need these as part of any advanced modeling technique. These are basically unskippable things you have to know how to do. And what's nice about them is these are the skills that do directly transition between CAD systems. So, you might be learning it with Onshape, but if you go to, industry and you're using Creo, you're using SolidWorks, you're using NX, this type of thinking, these skills, this transfers, this is what you really want to nail down with your students so that no matter where they go, they're able to succeed. So once you have all these, I would say you're probably at a beginner level and you're starting to get a little dangerous. And I personally identify 6. So the first one, I think this one gets skipped over heavily. It's just navigation. Being able to properly use the mouse as well as your hotkeys, having a good understanding of how do I rotate, how do I pan, how do I zoom. I feel like we like to just dive headfirst into things like sketching, which is very important, but you need to have a strong understanding of how do I even navigate this space. For some students, it'll come naturally. For others, it's going to be kind of a pain. Of course, I already talked about it, but sketching and constraints. So every custom part you make needs some sort of sketch. And as part of this, I do think constraints, so for those of you that know sketch constraints, it's not the easiest thing to learn, and frankly, there's not a lot of materials around it. So being able to master that is going to set you up significantly more for success and able to make better parametric robots. You can, again, update as the season goes on. And of course, feature creation. This one's pretty expected. You have to know how to turn your 2D shape into a 3D object so you can 3D print it. You can put it on a router. You can send it off to be laser cut, any of that. Also, other foundational skills include assembly and mates. You've got to know how to take any part you design, take a part you grab from online, and combine them together. Good mating strategies will save you hours, if not days, over the course of a build season. Same with organization. This one usually starts strong and then degrades as the season goes on. As we get crunch time and we're trying to get, parts made before we hit the road to head to whatever district event we're going to, we can end up with just tabs and, parts just randomly strewn about. So trying to set up better organization practices early on is going to be key, so you can, again, continue to iterate on your robot. And then this one is not, really as transferable to other CAD systems, but it is so fundamental to why Onshape works for FRC, and that's library usage. So whether that's the MKCAD library or the newly announced FRC Design Lib, which if you don't know what that is, I would highly recommend just looking it up on Chief Delphi, because that's going to be coming out probably within the next couple months. Those give you quick access to so many parts. Again, one of these things that's going to save you hours over the course of a season. And then what would be advanced skills? So I would say many of these are niche or very FRC specific. And of course, you can see I've got a bunch of the feature script logos there. So, knowing how to use tube converter, very helpful for robots, not necessarily helpful when you're getting out into the real world. So they're not necessary for basic parts, but do save massive time across a season. And also, again, heavily dictated by your team's skill set, tools, processes, whatever you deem to be important. So having these makes somebody a proficient user, and let's talk about them. So again, the first one, feature script. So this is a key part of Onshape, is that users have the ability to define their own features. So of course, everybody's familiar with extrude and revolve and sweep and loft, but the base code that runs those features is open source, and you can learn that language and write your own features to automate repetitive tasks or do something simpler to, again, rapidly speed up the rate at which you can develop these different subsystems. Top-down design, I've given talks on this before. Top-down design is just a fundamental design strategy that most teams should be aiming to use, just because it ensures that once you get to that final, sub-assembly fit stage, you're not finding that your elevator is now taking up the exact same space as your battery, which is also in the spot where your intake motor is. I put drawings as an advanced skill. This is the one I debated on whether it's foundational or advanced, and that's because there are teams that do a lot of manual manufacturing and they need to know how to make drawings, but there are other teams that do a lot of just 3D printing, laser cutting, router work, mill work, where the number of drawings you're going to make is very, very minimal unless it is a direct skill you want to teach. So that one definitely comes down to your team specifically. Others, of course, is sub-assembly management, so that gets into when to want to combine into the top-level robot, how do I do that effectively and quickly? Collaboration versions and history. This is pretty specific to Onshape, the fact that we have that Git-style branching, merging versions and history management. You don't need to know how to do it to make a simple part, but it's going to make it significantly easier when you want to look back in time and see how you made a part in the past or what it looked like before you went to your first district event versus, now going into the district championship. And then, of course, any team-specific workflows. I know looking around this room, I know there's a ton of teams here that are already designing their robots in Onshape and have for years, so you probably have figured out things that work for you. So, those are the type of things that you're going to have to figure out how you want to teach those to your students, make sure they effectively learn it and can implement it during the build season. All right, so I talked about a whole bunch of different things, and the curriculum and lessons that I'm going to present now start to address both those foundational skills as well as some of those advanced skills. So, of course, it's been brought up before, but I would be remiss if I did not start off by talking about frcdesign.org. So this website basically could be the whole presentation. It is that thorough. There is so much going on there, and it is very much worth everybody's time to look at. But of course, that can't fill a 50-minute talk, so I'm going to be elaborating on that and showing how you can actually use it. But there's so many things to highlight here. So the learning course, this is the main one, and this is a self-paced set of courses that are extremely detailed with tons of pictures and text and helpful notes that can walk, even the most inexperienced students through how do I make, a basic piece of box tube with a gusset on it, all the way up to how do I make a simple flywheel shooter. CAD best practices, these are great to look at if you're looking to improve how your team does things like top-down design or manages and labels things. These CAD best practices are huge. And the other resources, just a great list of other things that everybody should know about, such as your feature scripts, and other time-saving techniques. So should be featured heavily in any training you do. You can try and recreate this, but don't recreate the wheel. Honestly, just use it as it is and figure out how you can build it into your trainings. So I've already talked about this a little bit, but the design learning course itself is broken into these different stages. So you can see you have something like a stage with your different letters, and each of these then goes down into multiple different steps. It is extremely FRC focused, and I bring this up because I want to contrast this with the Onshape Learning Center, which I'm going to be talking about next. The Onshape Learning Center is significantly more broad and does apply to, both an educational and commercial audience, where frcdesign.org is explicitly made for this one purpose. So it's going to teach your students great skills of how to make an FRC robot, but we don't want students to just know how to make one thing. We need to make sure that when they get into industry, they can make any number of different products or items or different 3D printed things they may want. So definitely check this out. And I'm going to talk about, again, how to schedule that a little bit later on. Then the Onshape Learning Centers. This is, again, the one that I just talked about. This is more broad because it is actually managed by Onshape. So we update this every couple weeks as new features get released into the product every 3 weeks. The Onshape Learning Center keeps pace to match that and ensure that, there's always some type of learning material surrounding all the newest material that's going on. So the 4 sections we care about most in the Learning Center, it was originally 3, and then I added a 4th one because we actually added some new materials late last night that I think are relevant. So that's why lessons is on there now. But yeah, so it's learning pathways, courses, curriculum, and lessons. And I'm going to highlight some from each of these. So looking at the learning pathways. So I don't need to go a ton into these. As you can see, basically everything here is the dark blue because it's a link. So when you grab this presentation at the end, you can hop into any one of these to take a look at what they contain. But CAD Basics is your true, I'm starting at 0 and building my way up. Onshape Fundamentals CAD takes those core skills and builds on a little bit more. Onshape Fundamentals Data Management is really helpful when you want to get into things like, how do I use versions in history? How do I branch? How can I copy a document? How can I link a document? What happens if I delete a document? All these questions you may have about data management are answered there. And then top-down design, that is a non-FRC specific approach to how do I start with a basic sketch and then build an assembly, build things around that. For the courses, advanced part design, so it's not part of any pathway, but it is helpful. It's just nice to know these are the types of skills, again, that help you make real commercial ready products. Advanced Onshape assemblies is also helpful because it gets into things like mate relations. So when you're making that cascade elevator, and it's nice that your carriage goes up, 2 inches for every inch of your intermediate stage going up. Those types of topics are covered in Advanced Onshape assemblies. Assembly configurations, also really useful when you get into things like wanting to adjust your robot to see, how it's going to go to different scoring positions. If you want to set those as a known location, you can use configurations to handle things like that. And variables and expressions, these are helpful at the part studio level. If you want to make things extremely parametric and you want to set things to be maybe this hex shaft is 3 inches long, but I want to have a super quick, entry box so I can change it to 4 or 5 or 6. Lessons, so these are new. Actually, I don't know if anybody knows about these yet, again, because they came out last night. So, yeah, exactly. So I actually put a lot of time into these, specifically the constraints one, because I feel like sketch constraints is one of the, areas that gets skipped over the most. It's one of the hardest areas to troubleshoot. You as a mentor looking at what a student has done and understanding what has gone wrong and then also how to explain how to fix it, I've always found to be really tricky. So this constraints intro lesson is now there, and it is basically just a bunch of small little practice problems where you have to use every single type of constraint, and then you end up with some problems at the end where it's a little less guided and you have to work through it yourself. Same goes for the extrude intro lesson and the sketching intro lesson. Those are both meant to very specifically target and work on using extrudes in different ways and using sketches in different ways. So if you see students are struggling with any of these one specific topics, honestly sending to these lessons to get more of a foundation on those skills is going to be really helpful. And then there's the CAD for Robotics competitions curriculum. So we wrote this a little while ago, and a lot of it has generally been superseded by frcdesign.org just based on how specific frcdesign.org is. But because this applies to FTC, VEX, and FRC is what it was written for, I do like to pull out Unit 1 specifically for the scavenger hunt. There is a scavenger hunt that is located on an FRC field where students need to know how to zoom, pan, rotate around to find previous game elements hidden around. It's a really good way for students to, start to understand the different key commands and controls for Onshape. Unit 4 collaboration just elaborates on, again, how to use documents, branching, merging. And then Unit 6 gets into things like how to make drawings, how to export pictures for judges' handbooks, how to link out to other sources. So a whole bunch of different resources here, all of which are very useful and all of which are worth checking out. So again, you're going to have all these links at the end of the presentation, and definitely recommend giving them each a look. All right, so I've talked about skills you want to develop. I've talked about a ton of different resources you can use to develop these skills. What I think is actually most helpful is if we talk about how you can schedule and pace this. So again, just a show of the crowd, how many of you are actually going to be starting CAD training in like the next week or two? Okay, some. How many of you are already doing it? Okay, some. How many of you are waiting till the school year starts? Looks like most. All right, well, I took a guess you might be starting in August, so you could compress this down. I do think there's enough time to use this starting in September, but again, this is a good baseline to start with, sort of talking about pacing as well as teaching strategies, and then you can adjust this based on the time that you actually have. So I think it's helpful to also pick a goal. So setting a goal before kickoff, you want to set so I like to, when I was building this schedule, it was, here's where we want to be before kickoff. Here's my start point. Let's kind of work towards the middle and adjust things to get to a point where it's going to work in time. So these are the different ways you can look at it. Do you want students to be able to follow along while a mentor does in guides? That's valid if that's what works for your team. You can also do, students work with an assigned mentor or lead student, and they'll divide the work as needed. You can even do things like students, are able to take that master sketch or that block CAD, and they're able to turn it into a subsystem all on their own, and they give it back, and now it's a part of the robot. Students can even get into, actually handling the strategical design, not the right word, but the actual design concepts as well, and developing the master sketch that can given out to all the different students. And of course, students can also just run the whole process. There are some teams out there where the students have just done so much practicing and they're so familiar with these concepts that they're able to just run through the whole things by themselves. So in my mind, it's great if we can get new members to this point where they can either work with a lead student and help, or they can generally be given a structured guideline of here's the sketch, here's the block CAD that you need to recreate in a detailed fashion. You should be able to do that, while your returning students should really be able to be at any one of those last three levels. If they should be able to, at a minimum, take a subassembly, take the reference for that subassembly and run it out to a completed system, or they should be doing all that work themselves. So how should your team teach this? Again, this is my opinion. This is what I have seen work for a lot of different teams in my discussions with them over the past couple years, but it is obviously up to your team. I highly recommend using a self-paced learning style with mentor guidance. So in my mind, what this means is you aim to meet once or twice a week. If you're meeting more than that per week, then one of your meetings gets dedicated to CAD review, CAD discussion, and then starting the next set of lessons. But the key here is being able to provide office hours or after hours support. Students should have a way that they can get in contact with you as the mentor. They should be able to get in contact with their other students for review. They should be able to get in contact with a CAD lead. So if they run into any issues, you're not sitting there in a classroom trying to walk through on the board and being like, all right, now I'm going to hit the extrude button, and everybody tries to do it. It doesn't work. I've tried to run trainings like that, and it's really hard. So I truly think where CAD, can be very self-paced, especially with these resources we provided, I highly recommend this is the style that everybody uses. So with that, I did not know how to format this properly to put it in a presentation, so it's a little messy. Oh, I skipped ahead. Oops, I don't even know my own slides. It happens. Why should your team teach it this way? So, pros. Again, FRCdesign.org and Onshape Learning Center, they're built to be used in a self-paced style, so you might as well use them that way. Requires significantly less in-person meeting time and less mentor effort in person. Students can work when they have time. Again, you're trying to work around homework schedules, you're trying to work around sports practices, trying to work around vacations. All these things pop up, so having the ability for students to catch up or fall behind as needed is very important. And then again, advanced students, if you set a full schedule that the students know, if they are working at a quicker than usual pace, they can start to get ahead and then fall back when other students need help. The major con is students need to be self-motivated. And this is tough. This is the hardest part, is making sure that the students understand that, we can give you all of these resources, but you have to be a self-starter and you have to have the passion for this to understand that you need to take the time to learn it. It's not homework. You don't have to do it, but your team will succeed. You will do better if you take the time to learn this. Students don't all learn at the same pace. They don't all learn with the same style. So some really do prefer a very in-person or being walked through each step. If that works, that's what those in-person meetings can be used for. Or you can do office hour style meetings. Extended absences obviously are hard with vacation, things like that. And I do find this requires a start to finish plan, so you don't get to a point where you're like, I have made the plan for this week, and that student did it in 45 minutes, and I have no idea where I should send them next because I haven't thought that far ahead. Planning multiple weeks out so you have that buffer of a student is going really quickly. Let me give them another thing to do or another lesson that extends this concept. That's really important. Okay, now I think I'm getting into the mess. Oh yeah, let's go. So yeah, it's a lot. Couldn't really figure out how to fit like a calendar that was readable on a Google slide. So set up just some lesson pacing, and after building it out, it seems like this would take about 14 weeks, which there are more than 14 weeks between now and kickoff, which is great, and that's including like all your different breaks. So in theory, this aimed to provide about 1 to 3 hours of at-home work per week, while also allowing for one in-person meeting to do some like in-person setup, things you really want to be in person for, to like get students added to your classroom or handle any specific questions. So I'm not going to go a ton into it because again, I'm going to be providing the QR code. I'm also going to be posting this online later. So if you want to look at this schedule in depth, you'll be more than welcome to do so there. But for the first couple weeks, essentially, you're going to be starting on making sure that everybody is in the same Onshape working space. You're going to do an in-person scavenger hunt. I think this one is fun to do in person, so you can like really help, ensure students understand the mouse controls in person. And then you still have to send them off to the Intro to CAD learning pathway. This one's really quick. Should take under like 2 hours. Then I set aside time in each one so you can discuss what was learned or answer any final questions. I find students, might be able to finish it, but they're going to come in with some question that they need answered and might want to answer in person. And then just using one of those extra practice lessons, and then, really starting in on the Onshape fundamentals, and then doing the first part of frcdesign.org, which is getting those required course tools, which is adding things like feature scripts, making sure you have the part libraries. Doing this required course tools essentially sets a student up that if it were to just become build season, they would have all the tools they need that are FRC specific, which again is your parts libraries and your feature scripts. Then from there, we just launch into a pace of essentially doing one stage of FRC design. And how I would teach this and what I've done, bits and pieces of here and there, is something like frcdesign.org Stage 1B focuses a lot on gearboxes, talks about using like a chain gearbox or a belt gearbox. So I think it's helpful if students are able to hold these components before they have to work with them just in a digital sense. So if you can set aside time to literally lay out each of these different things that are going to be covered in that week's FRC design, course, it's going to be able to cement better of like, it's not just a gear on a screen and they don't really have a sense of scale. Having a sense of scale of bearings, gears, belts, chains, all that is really going to allow these concepts to stick. Same goes for things once you get into FRC Design's Stage 1C. So this is actually where students go. I made this call out here. So at this point, after about 5 weeks, if you follow this pacing, they should be at the beginner level because they've established all 6 of those foundational skills. Every one of those has been addressed. Plus, they are starting to understand some of the top-down design techniques. So they should, at this point, be able to take a sketch given to them, and with some mentor assistance, they should be able to run through and create a subassembly, which is great. Anything beyond here is getting into more of your FRC specific mechanisms. So Stage 1C, exercises 1 through 4 and 5 through 8, you're designing small things. Like, in 1 through 4, you're going to do like a small like intake roller. You might be doing another type of gearbox. You might be doing like a very simple extending mechanism, like part of an elevator. So I have these split up because they're a lot. And I frankly think doing all of these in 1 week would be kind of brutal. And again, then you get into this, so you go through Stage 1. So after Stage 1, you've done a lot of very small mechanisms. That I say you're proficient, because you are now able to, in general, you're able to model all of the different core components of any FRC-related subassembly. You're not going to be caught off guard by needing to make an intake roller with a couple bearings. You're going to be familiar with dead axle rollers, live axle rollers, using chain versus belt. So at this point, once you are here, you're probably pretty proficient. Anything past this point, you're doing significantly larger subassemblies. So for Stage 2A, you're actually going to be making a flywheel shooter. For 2B, you're actually going to be making a dead axle pivot. So these are definitely a little bit longer, but again, by this point, students should have those foundational skills, enough of the advanced skills that they can still finish this in a couple hours every week. And then I have it wrapping up with a catathon. This is what I think is the best way to cap off, once you've done all these things, because up to this point, you're making a bunch of pieces. You're not truly making any one complete robot. So at this point, it's great if you can find a past game or a past catathon, give the students the rule book, and frankly, let them go crazy and see what they're able to think up and combine to make a full robot. So that was a lot, and we'll take questions on that near the end, but I'm gonna keep talking. Also get some water. So my pacing thoughts. So I've talked about this again, aiming for around 1 hour, maxing out at 3, because I think anything over 3 hours, they probably just won't do, plain and simple. That's a lot to fit in there with homework and other things going on. And we also don't want to overload them, but don't want to risk going too slow. There is a happy medium for a lot of students here. If you don't give them enough work, they're going to get bored. If you give them too much work, they simply won't do it. So that's why, again, having the full schedule built out to allow slower students to work at this, 1 to 3 hour pace, while also allowing faster students to progress through this quicker and get to that, designing a full robot stage sooner is very helpful. And if you already have some students with some skills, so this was meant to go from like a true beginner all the way to, you're actually able to complete a catathon robot. At the end of this, I put some of my extra thoughts for like a condensed, I believe, like 8-week. What would I do if I have somebody that, last year maybe assisted on a couple mechanisms, they need to shore up their skills to be ready to handle the subassembly on their own, have sort of an abbreviated training schedule laid out down below. All right, so I think at this point, we're going to talk about using your classrooms. This is going to go from just being a whole lot of slides to an actual demo. So I'm going to show how you can use frcdesign.org. You can pair it with your classroom that you have for those classroom assignments features, and actually assign work and work with your students. So first things first, I have been surprised by how many people still are not in a classroom. How many of you, if you're using Onshape, how many of you are already in the educator plan and you have a classroom? How many of you are not sure? We should figure that out. Great, awesome, we can talk after this. So this is something we rolled out, I think a year ago, 2 years ago, a year ago? I don't remember, it's been a little while. Time just becomes all one thing. But what's nice about the educator plan for FRC is that it creates a single location, like a single entity that owns all of the Onshape documents, all of the folders. And what's great about this is it's different than a team where anybody can make a team and then they share documents they own with a team to give other people access. Well, if I leave the team, those documents disappear. When things are owned by an Onshape classroom, as students or mentors come and go, the ownership of those documents never changes. It is owned by the team's core entity. Things don't disappear. So if you've had documents walk away because students owned them, this helps address that need. And to also make sure that it's not tied to any one individual, I do recommend signing up with a team-wide account, something like CAD at your team's domain, or like, I think we have frcteam6329@gmail.com owns our educator plan, just so that I or John or one of the other mentors, we can log in and handle any administrative work that needs to be done of adding students, changing documents. So I think it's nice if it's not tied to any one specific mentor, but that's totally up to your team. And it does currently add simulation release management. Of course, Darren said earlier that CAM is coming, and you will need to be on an educator plan if you want access to Onshape's CAM Studio. That is a hard and fast requirement. So just throwing that out there. So using classes and assignments, so it is part of your educator plan, and what it allows you to do is group your students into a class. You can then assign assignments with a starting document, or you can allow them to submit any document as the submission for a given assignment. Allows you to keep your tabs on student progress and provide feedback as you go, so it just makes it a very simple back and forth process. And of course, can be used in conjunction with pretty much all of these lessons that I pointed out up to this point. So let's do a demo. Let's see if I can get this to go. Beautiful. All right, so I am in my classroom, and so what you're gonna see is when you log into Onshape and you have an educator plan, of course you have your standard, recently opened, created by me, shared with me, owned by me, but you're gonna have this entity up here, and this is your classroom. This is the entity that owns all of your Onshape documents, and you will also have a classes tab. You might not see this until you create a class, but classes are very easy to create. they're just under the create dropdown. But I'm gonna go take a look at a class I've already created and show, what this training looks like. So you can see I've got FRC team number, fall training right here. So when I open that up, I can see I've already assigned FRC design stage 1A, and I can see that 3 of my students have not started it, 2 are working on it, and 1 has already submitted. This is really nice. It makes it super easy for me to see, all right, at like a very top level, where am I at in progress? So, getting around to the next in-person meeting, have most people even started it? Are most people going to cram it in after midnight tonight? Where are we at on that pace? You can also see I set up another one as a draft, but I'll actually show how to actually do this full process. So after you've created a class, all you have to do is just set the name, and you will land on a page that looks like this, but it will be blank. And your first step is to add your members, and adding members is really easy. As you can see, we've got all kinds of these fake student accounts. These are pretty sweet. So you can add in your students by just using the invite users, and I will just type student, and I will add another one, and I will invite. So you can add your students as students. You can also, if you want your CAD leads for your team to be able to get into student work and provide feedback, you can also add anybody as another educator. If you add them as an educator, which you can see I can do, so if I have Pat, he's a TA, I could take his account and make him an educator, and then he is also able to create assignments, look at this student work. So it's not just one person that's going to have to be managing this entire process. You can have multiple mentors or mentors and students working together to train the newer students that need this resources. So adding your members is very easy, and then it's time to make an assignment. So this is where you're actually going to start bringing in those outside resources or allowing students to submit their own. So if you would like to create an assignment, I will say, let's do FRC design stage 1C. All right, so I'm going to set this one up and I'm going to assign it out. So instructions, I will say, use frcdesign.org to complete this document, and I will create it. And you're going to see here that you're going to have a couple different submission options. If students can start with a new document, which is not helpful because these are, they use a framework. The documents they need to start with have material already in them that they need to work from. So you can students can choose what to submit, and you can just publish that. And then the onus is on them to go to FRC Design, make a copy of the document, and then attach it as the submission for this assignment. Or you can set it up where students begin with a copy of a selected document. And at this point, I will go to FRC Design. I could go to stage 1C, open it up, and where is the exercise overview? So you can see all of these have a 1C exercise document. Copy this. I'll go copy that. So when I open it up, I will make my own copy. So make a copy to edit, and that did not go to the right place. Well, I have too many tabs open, so it redirected to the wrong spot. But anyways, I'll just show this anyways. So you would do something like an owned by me, and you'll open it and copy there. And then you will have your own copy of this. And then the process to then add it to an assignment is very easy. You go select document, and you find the one that you just made a copy of. So I'll just reuse the 1B, and select, and publish assignment. And just like that, you will see when I go back to my assignments page, I can see that I now have 7 students that have not started this document, so it is in progress. Other thing you can do as well, you can see this one was saved as a draft. So if you actually want to go do this now, just fully structure this all out and just release them every week, so you do all the work at once. When you create an assignment, instead of clicking publish assignment, if you click apply, it will be saved in this draft state ready to go. So at any time you can go in, publish the assignment, then students will be able to see it, they will be able to make their own copy and begin working on it. So so I'll open this up, and again, we can see that something like, I can see my 4 students here have not actually started this at all. Becky has submitted it, and Doug and Carlos are currently working on it. So again, what's nice about this is I do have a direct link into each student's Onshape document, as well as it tells me when they started and when they submitted. Of course, you can see I did this in the car this morning. That was fun. But you can pop into any one of these documents, and this is where it's helpful to leave feedback. So of course I can go in here, and I can see that Becky did this first exercise, which was making a box tube, but clearly forgot that the box tube actually needs to be hollow. We're not making a solid bar. So at this point, you have a couple different options. You can leave comments. So how many of you are familiar with the comment functionality in Onshape? I'm assuming most have seen this. All right, I'll just show it again really quick. But Onshape does have built-in comments, so you can tag features. So if you wanted to tag the end of this tube, I could then leave a comment of saying, don't forget to make sure your tube is hollow. And I can add a comment there. So when anybody opens it, student, fellow mentor, they can see that a comment was left on that part in the Onshape document. And then I can actually go back to my assignments, and I can change it from submitted to needs revision. So at this point, this is built for classroom use. So of course, there's a graded. We're not grading in FRC, hopefully. That'd be scary. But you can see now that it shows that there are comments left and that it needs to be revised. So this makes it very simple for you to go back and forth with your students saying, here's the feedback I have for you. They can do the same. If they can leave comments in there, you open it up, you reply to those comments, and then let them know whether it's good or whether it needs to go back and be reworked. So setting this up, whether, again, you want to provide the document in there that students make the copy of, you want to put the onus on them to find the document, copy it, and then submit it as part of their assignment. That's up to you and your workflow. But doing this does make it super easy to structure out, a full, multiple weeks of training courses. If you set this up, you can just set each one to being active, and the students can begin working whenever necessary. All right, I think that's a good brief into how to use classes and assignments with these materials. That's my desktop. So I'll wrap that up. So classes, they're pretty easy to create. They're pretty easy to add students to. Like I said, your CAD leads or your mentors can be the educators that go in there and work with the students to provide the extra assistance. Does make it easy to provide feedback and answer any questions. Again, can be very regimented where you want to provide those source documents, or it can be pretty open-ended where you're going to allow students to submit whatever they would like to each assignment. And it does make it very easy to identify which students may need extra in-person support because they're struggling to get everything done. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go relatively quickly through this. Again, this is just some highlights of different things that I would recommend to, further practice these concepts. One of my favorites is a good cadathon. The best way to get good at designing robots is to design robots. So again, like every other skill, the more you do it, the more you practice, the better you'll be. And really the payoff is speed. Again, a lot of students can model a very good robot, but the difference between a very successful team and a team that might struggle a little bit is how quickly they get to that point where they're done with the model, they're able to manufacture, and they're able to get it on the field. So modeling a mechanism, way, way easier the second time. If you've already modeled an intake or a flywheel shooter, those concepts will not be new to you when you go back and make it in season, so it'll go significantly quicker. So I highly recommend checking out, West Coast Products puts on some great cadathons. They might be running another one this year. There's some others that are linked on Chief Delphi that are very helpful, have great game manuals, so there's a ton to peruse there. And of course, you can also just use past games if you then even want to bring this into, prototyping and actually making a robot. You can also upgrade your current robot. This is one of my favorite ones. This was my favorite one to do as a student. Being able to choose a mechanism on your robot and walk through the process of what worked, what didn't work, and how can I replace it and upgrade it, does give you like a very, reasonable set of boundaries of, students, they're not given this massive assignment. There's a very set thing of, the intake can only be so big, it can only have so many motors, and it needs to do X task. That very structured set of tasks, I think makes it more approachable to be able to figure out, I have something to reference back to. I know how the intake worked in the past. I know how I can adjust it to make it better for the future. And then, of course, actually improving your pit or shop. I think this is an underutilized one. I think, honestly, more teams need to spend time, and, Mike talked about this earlier, organizing. You can use Onshape and use these skills you're developing to improve pretty much every aspect beside just your robot, whether it's, making different types of pit structures or making a new robot cart. This is a great way to apply CAD skills beyond just making the electromechanical, FRC robot. Being able to make, other structures, this is going to be, just as industry relevant as being able to use these motors and these gearboxes. So branching out and doing this type of work, I find is also really, really helpful. Okay, that was a lot. I talked a lot. But that's all I have right now. So thank you everybody for following along. Hopefully that was helpful, insightful. You learned something. You feel like, you're a little more prepared to walk students through preparing for, the next season, especially when it comes to modeling your robots. And yeah, that will link you to a public version of this presentation. And with that, we can do questions. What do you mean it's not public? Oh, come on. Thought I figured this out. Which one did I make public? I don't even know what that's going to then. I just gave you a bad QR code. I don't know what to tell you. It worked this morning when I tried it. All right. Well, I'm not really sure how to fix that on the spot. Yeah, thanks. Well, I tried. You don't win them all. Other questions, other thoughts, feedback?
Your classroom, when you broke it out in your schedule, how much time is that classroom in class, in person?
I was thinking around an hour. I honestly think you can handle a lot of, the past week's questions probably in 15 to 30 minutes, and you can start either on the next assignment or you can do like an in-person talk about, again, those hands-on items of let's actually look at gears and belts and chains and stuff like that. I think an hour is reasonable. I definitely think you can make it longer if you want. But yeah, I mean, hour and a half I think would work great. Yep.
Is there an easy way for someone to set up all the unforeseen design modules in a class and then just share it with someone else to use, rather than all having to do that work over and over?
So I thought that was going to come up. So not right now. That is something that we've had requested, and we're working on that. That's like an internal Onshape, improvement request. What you can do is you could set this up, and then you have the ability to duplicate it in your classroom, but not like, I can't make this for 6329 and then share it with like another separate team. So not at this time, no. But that's a great question.
Am I able to transfer ownership of the classroom from my personal email to the team email?
You are, yes. That's pretty easy. It's like 2 clicks. If you own the document and you are an admin of the classroom, you can right-click on anything you own, whether it's a folder, document, doesn't matter. You right-click on it, menu, transfer ownership. You can transfer it into the classroom. Yep. So definitely do that with any like old robot designs you want to bring in there to make sure the team holds on to. You can transfer any of that work in. Yep, what's up? Yep. Yeah. You cannot. You would have to submit a support ticket, which then probably goes to me, and then I can help you with that. Yeah, exactly. So answering for a friend, I might be that friend that can help you. Yeah, exactly. So yes, that is a problem that we can help you with. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure I really should be in this session. I should in the sense that we're transitioning from different cat classes.
Yep.
Several students who have been very interested in Onshape, some pretty good at Onshape. But we don't have, there's no teacher. I am not someone who teaches. So we have a number of students, not a lot, maybe 3 or 4, who have very cataloged design skills. Some of them have actually, I think over the summer, have learned more about Onshape. So I'm in a position now where moving the team to Onshape with kind of that foundation.
Yep.
So any helpful hints on how to kind of transition the team, given that set of resources with that background.
So you're saying that some students already have some skills, and you're looking to transfer a whole team?
Skills that they're interested, everybody wants to move, so there's the enthusiasm and there's some level of skills.
Yep.
But there's not a mentor person
Yep.
that really can teach kind of to the level
Yep.
that I see going on here. So I think we're committed to moving.
Yep.
And we're trying to get this all done, of course, in a pretty quick set of time, and also teach the fundamental cat skills.
Yep. I honestly think at that point it goes back to something I heard earlier today. It's peer-to-peer. I think is your best option there. So students that have these skills, I honestly think going back on that schedule, if students have spent their summer, and they're already at the point where they might be like borderline beginner to proficient, where they've got like a good foundation but might not have all the advanced skills, they probably can be the person that is answering questions for these earlier lessons. they're going to be, very aware of all these core concepts that are bringing up in the first couple weeks. And really, truly, FRC design as it is so well written and explained that I think it can pretty much walk through. The reason it was written is so that teams that don't have a mentor can figure it out. So I think while having a mentor that is there that has some experience and can sort of help walk through problems is a nice to have, I do not think it is necessarily a need to have. There are also other good online communities. A lot of them are findable through Chief Delphi, but there's good online communities that, if you have any of these questions you're really stuck on, can help walk you through these problems as well. Yeah. So I think, using your advanced students to work with your younger students, and then also just really relying on FRC design, I don't think you need to have a mentor that has this experience. Yep. We're good? We're done? Do I have time for one more question or get out of here? I'm getting the shake. Is it quick?
Fairly quick.
Yeah.
We teach out of an engineering classroom where we have decent laptops.
Yep.
All the kids have Chromebooks, which are potatoes.
Yep.
How far can they get at home with their potato Chromebooks on something?
They should be able to get all the way through frcdesign.org. It's going to be once they get into like a true cadathon where they're trying to make a complete robot, that's where they might start to struggle. But Chromebook, they can make it through all of these self-paced lessons just fine. Cool. Thanks, everybody. I don't even know what that was going to, honestly. That's fine. All right, I'll get out of here.